Netanyahu must have thought when he dropped 80 tons of high explosives on the Lebanese resistance leader, Sayed Hussain Nasrallah, that that would be the end of the story. They then proceeded to force the Lebanese government to force the resistance into a ceasefire. And then they said, all of them said, for a whole month they've been saying that was the end of the story. Well, they know different now. The resistance hasn't gone away, you know, in Lebanon. 1.4 million people turned up for the funeral yesterday of Sayed Hussain Nasrallah and his comrades in the leadership of Hezbollah. The bitter cold weather, even more importantly, the presence overhead of Israeli bombers flying over the crowd, who might easily have, given Netanyahu's track record, have dropped their payloads on the mourners at a funeral. Don't think that would be beneath them. The fact that Iranian planes were banned from landing, Yemenis, Iraqis couldn't get there. How many millions might there have been? But 1.4 million Lebanese in a country of fewer than 5 million people, many of whom live actually outside the country, is a very formidable force. And so the attempt to force the resistance out of Lebanese politics altogether, out of the government, maybe even out of the parliament, out of any kind of influence over the course of events in the country, it's now clear have failed. Lebanon's future, who's in charge? Well, of course, as I have said many times, if you had proper democracy in Lebanon, Sayed Hussain would have been the president this last 25 years past, but he never wanted to be. The resistance does not want to be in power in Lebanon because it does not want to upset the confessional and sectarian balance of power in the equilibrium of Lebanon means something to the resistance. They've lived through civil wars. They don't want civil wars in Lebanon in the future. So with remarkable forbearance, the resistance agreed to a ceasefire. They could have gone on fighting and resisting every inch of Israel's advance into the country, but they took the advice of the new president of Lebanon and ceased their firing. But the ceasefire is over now. A ceasefire which was broken more than 1,550 times by Israel. But it's over now. But Israel have not withdrawn from all of Lebanon, as they were required to do by the terms of the ceasefire agreement. There are 5 Israeli fortresses inside Lebanese territory, just like there are now 9 new military bases for Netanyahu inside the Syrian Arab Republic. These fortresses, these bases, are going to be the focus of some very dramatic events to come. Of that, I'm certain. We're looking at Lebanon's future. Who's in charge? Here on Have It Out with Galloway. You've come to the right place. Sayed Hussain Makke holds a BA in journalism and an MA in religions and global politics. He's been a student of the Islamic sciences since 2012 at the seminary in Lebanon. He's also, I should say, a very prodigious and important, increasingly influential scholar on social media, which these days is not a small thing. Sayed Hussain, thanks very much for coming on the show again. It's good to see you. It was a remarkable event in Lebanon this week. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything quite like it. How did it appear to you?
Well, the last time that I saw scenes like that were the scenes that were there before I was even born at the funeral of Imam Khomeini in Iran. I haven't seen a modern leader invoke such love in his followers even after his death. And that's without bringing up all the different situations that were leading up to this funeral, where people were almost banned from mourning Sayed Hussain Nasrallah in public, to the point that even carrying his picture in the Lebanese airport, there were several reports of people being told to put the pictures away, even though there isn't any actual law in Lebanon of carrying such pictures of political figures or anyone else. Uh, Leading up to this funeral, there was a lot of demonization of the people who subscribe to the resistance ideology in Lebanon. And the whole idea of instability in Lebanon being blamed on those who were defending Gaza and the downtrodden in Gaza. Leading up to this, there were major scenes that first scared those who believed the resistance was over, which was the original ending of the ceasefire at the end of January, where Lebanese civilians, old ladies, would walk into their villages in front of Israeli tanks and armed soldiers. And many people were killed there. My cousin himself was killed as he was entering into his village of Adaisi. And several people, even people in the army, the Lebanese army, were killed. That was the first scene that scared people into thinking that the Lebanese resistance actually hasn't been killed yet, as they perceived it was. And leading up to this funeral was going to be make or break. It was supposed to either send a message that it was actually finished, or it was going to send a message that the resistance is alive and well. And what we saw was 1.5 million people attend the funeral and Israeli jets flying over. I was there, George, and when the Israeli jets flew over, we saw how close they were. We could see the Israeli symbols on the jets. My brother was right next to me. He said, "What's that sound?" And he grabbed my arm, and we looked up, and everyone looked up. It didn't even take a second. No one flinched until everyone stood up and chanted in anger against the Jets. No one was scared by the Jets. I'm not sure what they were really expecting, but if they were thinking that they were going to scare these people, this is not how it goes. And they only made the funeral even more historic. Even in his death, he was honored by how much he scared the killers of children. So this was an incredible day. Anyone that was there would see that these scenes are very difficult to replicate, perhaps once a lifetime, for a person who is regarded by much of the world as its greatest freedom fighter of the last century.
The audiences for the event were many, of course. You've talked about the Lebanese audience. There's less than 5 million people in Lebanon. Many of them don't actually live there, but the people in the south do, and the supporters of Hassan Nasrallah do. And so the first impact must have been on the political structure in Lebanon. They were hoping, indeed, the US envoy, in the presence of the president, was gloating that the resistance had been defeated. She thanked Israel for defeating the resistance in the presence of the president of Lebanon. So the first impact must have been on the political class in Lebanon. Now they know for sure that you cannot cancel the supporters of Sayed Hassan Nasrallah.
No, they know for sure, and I believe the message was very well received. People actually were traveling from all over Lebanon in very difficult weather conditions. So people that were up in the north and people from the south were, because of the weather conditions, traveling on foot because much of their vehicles stopped working. They would all come towards Beirut to be there. The stadium was full at 6 a.m., George. The ceremony begins at 1 p.m. The stadium was full at 6 a.m. I was only able to get in because I study Islam, I'm a scholar of Islam, so I went in with a scholarly class. But for many people that I know, and they were all waiting outside and they were happy too. They were happy to be there from 6 a.m. onwards. And not only this, but Lebanese people from all over the world, George, so they all came home to attend this funeral. Aside from Beirut being full of people from all around the world, I was meeting foreigners everywhere in every cafe, coming from all walks of life, and not just Muslims and not just Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, non Muslims, atheists, Christians. There were several people that were there, nuns and priests, and they would hold the cross and they would say that even in the name of the Lord Father and Jesus Christ, we'll answer your call, O Nasrallah. This is someone who is not only a Lebanese figure and not only a Muslim figure. He was beyond that. He represented the idea of freeing oneself completely, freeing yourself not only in terms of your land, but freeing yourself also in your mind. He wanted to liberate the whole world, and people could see that.
Yes, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, as Bob Marley put it. That was one of the messages. But the second audience must have been across the border in occupied Palestine and their United States patron. If they imagined that the resistance had gone, that it was headless, leaderless, and increasingly weakly supported amongst the population, they too must have learned differently yesterday. How will that impact on Netanyahu's policy going forward? This is a big provocation, the 5 fortresses that they have refused to vacate. The history shows that such fortresses don't last for long. What do you think is the next move about what we can now again call the remaining Israeli occupation of Lebanon?
Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, he used to call the Hezbollah party in Lebanon the party of the people. And although most people would consider that to be the party of resistance, even if Hezbollah was not there, the people are a people of resistance. In that, even if right now Hezbollah was to give over their arms, the people of Lebanon, the people who support resistance, would never accept for their land to be occupied, and they would go up even as families, even as individuals. And that was the case in the 70s and the 80s, and before Hezbollah even became popular. So it isn't never even about Hezbollah or relying on Hezbollah. It's the people. And that's why yesterday 1.5 million people showed up. The resistance is the people. With their existence, they resist. So with Israel trying to remain in Lebanon in these 5 points, I'm not sure what they are aiming to achieve, because the same thing that happened in the 80s, before Hezbollah even existed, the same thing that happened in the 90s, leading up to their retreat in the year 2000, will happen again 25 years later, when the resistance is much more capable and has much more global support, and they will definitely not be able to remain there. They may think that things are different now because they apparently killed the resistance, but the resistance is the people. And as butcherous as they may be, they cannot butcher 1.5 million people. And of course, that isn't even the total support of the resistance structure.
Now, another audience is that part of the Muslim world that is infused with takfiri, sectarian impulses, which have them secretly, not so secretly, being exultant at the killing of Sayed Hussain. But they got an answer from Gaza, from Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman of the Palestinian resistance, on the day of the funeral, did they not?
Yes, Abu Ubaidah sent his salutations to his comrade in arms and struggle, to Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the whole Lebanese resistance. Not only this, but Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah answered them himself with his own death, that the man that they claim is a killer of Syrian children, these preposterous claims that have not even a shred of evidence to blame Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, in his death, he died for Gaza, for Palestine. Jerusalem was his dream. He was beyond sectarianism as much as they tried to bring him down into the sectarian dispute. Just like Abu Ubaidah said, he was beyond that. He died, the leader of the Shia died for his Sunni brothers. And in his death, he answered all those who questioned, was he really the killer of Sunnis? Well, how could the killer of Sunnis die for his Sunni brethren in Palestine in a war that the Lebanese government at the time had wanted him to stay out of, that people were advising him to stay out of? And he said, as a human being, not even as a Muslim, but as a human being, how can I stay silent when these people are being massacred and killed, like the rest of the world was silent? Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah barely used to ever speak in sectarian rhetoric. You'll find only rare clips where he would even mention that he was a Shi'i or Shia. But when he did, you will notice it was on Quds Day, on the day of Palestine and Jerusalem. And he said, we, the Shia of Ali bin Abi Talib, will never abandon Palestine. And you may call them names, call us Rafida, call us any names, and kill the Shia wherever you want to find them. Use all those sectarian tropes as much as you want. Those are the Zionists' favorite moves, the sectarian tropes. We, the Shia, will never abandon Palestine. And he did that on purpose because he knew that Shia look up to him as their leader. And he knew what he says they will take in. So he wanted to squash any sectarian rhetoric, at least coming from the Shia people. Yet there are those who, at the bidding of the Zionists, whether they know it or not, they are helping and aiding Zionist talking points when they bring in sectarian conflicts into the situation. Sayyid Hassan cannot prove more that he is non-sectarian than bearing 85 tons of American bunker buster bombs onto his human body. There is no more a human being can show that he is not for any sectarianism, but he is for truth, justice, and liberation, for Islam and humanity.
Well, if they don't know it, they must be pretty stupid. I suspect they know it, frankly. Now, finally, I know you're a scholar. You're not a politician per se, but politics in Lebanon goes on, and I'm asking the question today: Lebanon's future, who's in charge? Will the new president, the putative prime minister, heed the message of the funeral of Nasrallah and make the necessary accommodation to keep a very fragile Lebanon together? It's always been fragile, by the way, long before Hezbollah existed. I lived in Beirut in 1977. It was pretty fragile then. It's been fragile always. But the resistance want to keep Lebanon together as one country, as one people. Will the others heed that call, heed that message going forward?
Sheikh Naim Qasim's speech yesterday, if the people were listening, was actually very interesting in that he showed that he was very willing for he himself and his party and for the Shia of Lebanon to be more politically involved in Lebanon and to be able to compromise on certain issues, but there had to be some conditions. And the main condition was the sovereignty of Lebanon, that it cannot be Israel and the US giving the orders in Lebanon. And even though I unfortunately feel like this is a condition that will not be met, and Sheikh Naim is hopeful in his offer, but I think for the next at least 2 years before the elections, a year and a half or 2 years till the elections take place, that it's going to be a struggle in which America and Israel are more influential in Lebanon. And we can see what happened recently with the banning of Iranian flights. And what's very ironic is that there were always these rumors that Iran was the one that was getting involved in Lebanese politics, and that we care about Lebanese sovereignty and we are for the nation of Lebanon. Yet, when it comes to the US interests, the government has so far prioritized those interests more than its own civilians. There were a few people that were killed in the south of Lebanon just 2 weeks ago. A small 13-year-old girl was killed in the village of Hula. She was shot in the cheek, she was killed, and she was that whole night as a corpse with her family inside their house, afraid to leave because the Israeli soldiers would shoot them in their own village. And these were children and a family, not armed people. There was not even a word of condemnation from the government. Instead, some of the UN personnel were harmed in some skirmishes. No one was killed, but the government let out an official statement condemning any harm coming towards any UN personnel. And of course, we agree with that. We don't want any harm to come towards any UN personnel. Yet, you would think that you should also mention the Lebanese civilians that were killed in your land. Or is the south of Lebanon not regarded as Lebanese all of a sudden? So, unfortunately, I'm not too hopeful for the next year and a half in terms of them heeding the call. But what I am hopeful in is the power over the people. And the power of the people, George, is way too strong to be ignored. What I saw yesterday, what anyone that was present saw, that is way too strong of a power. When you stand in front of a tank and you are a 60-year-old woman and you have no arms, you stand in front of that tank and you're doing this constantly. Nothing is stopping you. Even after your whole village was bombed and flattened and over 4,000 people were killed, when those jets flew over the stadium yesterday, everyone was rising in anger. These people, you cannot break them. And there are a lot of them, and they make up the structure of Lebanon. And so there has to be coexistence. And the Shia of Lebanon are holding out their hands for coexistence on the premise that it is a sovereign Lebanon, not influenced by US or Zionist interests before their own citizens.
Sayed Hussain Makke, thank you very much for being with us on the show today. Let's go to our unique feature, our video wall, where the audience can actually speak back and be seen doing so. Let's talk to Sheikh Tawqir Ishaq first of all. I'm not sure where you are, Sheikh, but you're welcome anyway.
Thank you very much. I'm based in the Midlands in the UK. Can you hear me and see me okay?
All very clear, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd very much like to ask you a couple of questions, actually, George. Lovely to be able to speak to you and be given this opportunity. I can see all countries around this Zionist entity to be quite subservient to US policy. And how can they snap out of this immaturity and the stupidity that they are in?
Well, Sheikh, America's not what it used to be. The power of the United States is not greater than it was 5 weeks ago when Joe Biden was in charge. And in fact, the first 5 weeks of the Trump presidency have produced hitherto undreamt of divisions within what I will call the imperialist camp. The European governments are now as hostile to the United States as they previously were to the Russian Federation. So the international coalition in defense of the United States' imperial policies is well and truly shattered. After all, President Trump is threatening to invade Canada, a British Commonwealth country, and take it over. He's threatening to invade Greenland and take it from Denmark, although Denmark is also a member of NATO, the military alliance led by the United States. So America is not stronger than it was. Indeed, it is indisputably weaker. It now leads a weaker front than it did even 5 or 6 weeks ago. So I'm not saying that the US empire is a paper tiger. It's still a tiger, but it's a declining tiger. It's missing quite a lot of its teeth, quite a lot of its claws, and there are other tigers now, leaner, hungrier, fitter tigers. So anyone who's putting their bets on their alliance with the United States is making a mistake. If they don't believe me, they could ask a whole line of people, but perhaps the most obvious one, they could ask President Zelensky of Ukraine. What happens when you're no longer regarded as an asset by the United States empire? So I caution the countries, and there are, you're right, Sheikh, many, who still consider themselves house slaves of the United States master, to think again before it's too late. Let me talk now to a compatriot of mine. Rabia Billings is in Scotland. Rabia, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Hi, Mr. Galloway. Sir Galloway, I'd first like to say thank you for the role you played in South Africa in our liberation. My question to you is, under the 1948 Genocide Convention, all signatories, including the UK, are obligated to prevent and punish acts of genocide. Given the UK government's ongoing diplomatic, military, and economic support for Israel, amidst widespread allegation of genocide in Gaza and occupied Palestinian territories, what legal accountability could the UK government face for its complicity? And shouldn't the UK government be held responsible under international law for failing to prevent or actively enabling these violations? And what steps must be taken to ensure compliance with its legal obligations?
Well, Rabia, I'm in no doubt at all that the British government is outside of British law, never mind outside its international legal obligations that you have adumbrated. It is, according to the highest court in the world, the ICJ, it is a legal obligation on all persons, and of course, including governments, more importantly, including governments, to stop the commissioning and carrying out of genocidal acts. They have signed a legal commitment that they will do that, but they are not doing it. The British government is still allowing officers of the Netanyahu army to come and train, and also to train our military and our police, even though the head of that military is a wanted criminal, according to international law, according to the warrants of the International Criminal Court, of which the United Kingdom is a member. We are still flying only on the days when there are prisoner releases. United Kingdom Royal Air Force aircraft carrier, aircraft assets, reconnaissance assets, we are still flying out of Cyprus over Gaza to help Netanyahu spot and, if possible, help destroy the very elements of the Palestinian resistance who are releasing the prisoners. It's unbelievable collusion that the United Kingdom is involved in. The United Kingdom is still selling weapons to a government, the head of which is a wanted war criminal. Netanyahu is a wanted war criminal, and we are still licensing the selling of weapons. United Kingdom citizens are still being allowed to go and fight in Netanyahu's army, kill people, and then come back to UK airports without let or hindrance and resume their civilian lives in the United Kingdom. These are all blatantly illegal acts. Now, if we had a justice system that could be depended upon, these illegal acts would already have been apprehended and stopped by the UK court system, but we don't have such a justice system. But things change, you know. What is something you can get away with today may not be something you can get away with tomorrow. And they should all remember that. Thank you, Rabia. Berhat Kem Honor is in London. Let's hear what Berhat has to say. Go ahead, sir.
Man wants dominion and absolute control and authority, whereas complete obedience, absolute authority, sovereignty and legislation belongs to God Mighty alone. This is what Islamic political thought is about in actuality. Rendering the judgment completely to God. This does not mean that man does not make new laws. However, it means that we do not neglect divine law. We make it the center, we implement it, and we do not let anyone violate it, even the Saudi. Now, since this is what Islam is about, since the Quran says legislation is solely a divine right, and this is what Islam is about, this is what Islam political thought entails, this is what we call pan-Islamism. What do you think about pan-Islamism and this idea and its relation to secularism, democracy, pan-Arabism, and nationalism in the Muslim world? Thank you, George.
Well, look, you've come to the wrong man to ask questions about Islamic theology. I answer questions about politics. And in this country and many others, we have a system that calls itself a democracy. And if you don't vote, then you will find that the others who vote may well elect someone who carries out legislative and governmental acts that are against your interests and against the interests that you yourself support. Let's give an example. I can presume, I hope, that you're a supporter of the rights of the Palestinian people. If you don't vote for candidates who oppose Israel, who demand an end to genocide, who support the rights of the Palestinian people, then the people who are elected because you did not vote will continue to support genocide, in which case your protestation that you support the Palestinian cause is rendered null and void because you had a chance to elect someone, let's say me, for example. If you had elected me, there would have been no more support for Israel. There would have been absolute support for the Palestinian cause. But you refused to elect me because you say somehow it's haram to do so. All of us are answerable on the judgment day for what we did and what we did not do. I'm ready to meet my Maker, hopeful that I will pass muster. You'll have to hope the same. Dennis Ballantyne is in New York, in the United States. Let's hear from Dennis. What do you want to say, Dennis?
2 points I'd like to make. Number one, all praise to the memory and the legacy of Hassan Nasrallah. I believe that his legacy and his influence will only continue to grow, much the same as Martin Luther King and JFK. When the day that we got the news that Hassan Nasrallah was martyred, I experienced that as a turning point, and I expressed that to you on that day or the next day. And I still do believe that is true, that his influence is incomparable and will continue to influence not only Islam, but global events in the future. So having said that, just all praise to Hassan Nasrallah. The point I'd like to make today, I know the topic is about Lebanon, and I think this is very pertinent to the topic of Lebanon. I want to go to the meeting in Saudi Arabia between the Russian delegation and the US delegation. And what that meant to me, there were 3 representatives from the United States, Secretary of State Rubio, another senior official whose name I forget now, but most importantly for me is Steve Witkoff was there. And there were 3 representatives from the Russian side, and that is Sergei Lavrov, another one of Putin's senior political advisors, and most importantly for me, a man named Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, who is a Harvard MBA, Stanford graduate, former Goldman Sachs senior executive, and who is now one of Putin's senior advisors and confidants. The reason I'm bringing this up and stressing the point is that in the room in Saudi Arabia were 2 different groups of people. There was the political faction, and then there was the money people. Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev were there to discuss, in a nutshell, how to reorganize international capital flows. And I think this is one of Putin's primary objectives. And I think that with all of the conversation about all the other aspects of international relations and military and political and cultural and ethnic and all of that, I think we really need to keep our eye on the big picture, which is what I think is how international capital flows are being reorganized, and Trump's efforts to reintegrate Russia into the international financial system, and most importantly, at the expense of the Chinese. The yellow peril and Zionism are alive and well in Washington, D.C.
Well,
and I think
that they might as well be chasing moonbeams. They might as well be howling at the moon if they imagine that there are any circumstances in which Russia will breach its never closer relationship with the People's Republic of China. President Xi and President Putin spoke earlier this week, yesterday I think, to brief each other, principally for Putin to brief President Xi Jinping on the rapid developments that are taking place on the Russia, America, Ukraine track. I'm sure that the Chinese government have no doubts whatsoever, and I, as a keen student of these things, have no doubts whatsoever that any hope of dividing Russia and China is a forlorn hope. Now, you say that these top money men were there in Riyadh. I'd be surprised if it were not the case. I too want to see an end to the now ossified international financial system. The Bretton Woods was a very long time ago. The rise of the BRICS countries, the relative decline of the European countries, quite a steep relative decline. The average person in China is now better off than the average person in the European Union. Who would have thought that that day would come? When I was a kid, your mother used to say, "Eat up that dinner. Don't leave food. They're starving in China, you know." Well, they ain't starving in China anymore. So I too am in favor of a substantial revamping of the international financial system, and inevitably, the United States companies have lost $300 billion through the sanctions over Russia. The West, European Union, and the United States are holding even more than that of Russian sovereign wealth. That's going to all take a lot of untangling. Then there's the issue of the United States' interest in the rare earth materials lying under Ukrainian soil. Most of it soil that is now trodden by Russian army boots. But the United States has a legitimate interest in those things. If it wants to buy those things at the proper price, I'm sure that Russia will be ready to accommodate them in that regard. You're right to be alert. It's important always to be alert. It's important always to question more. But it's not right to imagine that everything is a sellout waiting to happen, that everything is a conspiracy against the things that you and I believe in. I believe that Russia and China are together forever. I believe that Russia and China together have changed the world. I believe that Russia and China and South Africa and Iran and other BRICS countries are together on the one road, and that one road leads to a better world. Let me go to Sweden, to Matthias von Joss in Laholm in Sweden. Matthias, what would you like to say?
According to those peace talks and Putin and Trump starting up a relationship again or with Putin. Thinking about that and the issue of Lebanon, how would you believe if there would be open conflict between Israel and Lebanon, the Hezbollah? How do you think? How do you believe Iran would be acting if that would happen? And if so, what about the alliance, or can we call it the alliance between Russia and Iran? According to the United States, new started relationship with Russia. It's wouldn't that be like a test for that relationship if that were to happen?
Yeah, I see the test as being the other way around. How can the United States launch a war against Iran and be friends with Russia at the same time? How can Israel attack Iran and expect Russia not to react? And how can the Israelis believe that Donald Trump wants to go back to war with Russia? So I think the tests are on the other way around. The truth is that the Lebanese people will liberate their land, that the resistance to Israeli occupation in Lebanon will never stop. The resistance to Israeli occupation in Gaza will never stop. The resistance in the West Bank will never stop. Iran will never stop supporting the Palestinian people. And these are known facts. They are rock-solid facts and coordinates around which everyone will have to eventually maneuver and place themselves. So the immediate future is uncertain, but the long-term future is very certain. The long-term future is that Russia and China and Iran and the BRICS are on the way up, and the Western countries are on the way down. In the short term, maybe the Israelis will take some mad, reckless gamble, maybe. But whether they'll be able to count on the support of Donald Trump for that gamble is not as clear, in my opinion, as some people think. If you'll forgive me saying en passant, Sweden chose one hell of a time to finally join NATO, just as NATO was going out of business. Charles Kelly, is a wealth coach in London. Charles, give me some coaching.
Hello, George. Nice to see you again. I'm old enough to remember that the Lebanon, when it was like the Mediterranean of that part of the world, it was like the Riviera, and it was a prosperous country. And I'd met many Lebanese people in London that were wealthy businessmen. and it seems to have been smashed to smithereens now. I wonder how it's going to be rebuilt after these wars. And you mentioned about America. I mean, we've had empires from the Roman Empire to the British Empire to the American Empire, and they all come to an end. So we're seeing that now, as America hasn't got the influence that it had. It used to go in and demolish countries, and then it would get all the contracts to rebuild them through companies like Bechtel. So I wonder what you think will happen to try and rebuild these countries.
What a very clever question, unfortunately, to end on, because we've got no more time. Listen, according to the laws of aerodynamics, the bumblebee cannot fly. Its body weight is too heavy, its wings too flimsy. According to the laws of aerodynamics, the bumblebee cannot fly, but yet it flies. Lebanon, on paper, cannot possibly function as a state, given the dislocation it has suffered, given the devastation to which you refer, given the hostile neighbor to its south, constantly bombing and infringing on its sovereignty, given the vociferous nature of the Lebanese community. Lebanon cannot exist, and yet exist it does. I've been in and out of Lebanon since 1977, which is a very long time ago, almost 50 years. And I have seen this beautiful country with its enormously industrious people, its ingenuity, its vibrant and quite unique Levantine culture. I have seen it in dark days and fine. And yet it continues to exist and is a great tribute to the human spirit. And I don't believe that any here today, gone tomorrow, colonial settler state on its southern border, or any fading, failing American empire, or any Takfiri, temporary, I'm sure, control of Syria to its north, however unstable the Jordanian monarchy will be to its east, I don't believe that Lebanon will ever die. And I pray for it. I pray for its stability, for its security, and for the freedom, independence, and sovereignty of its people. The Lebanese are Arabs, and the Arabs, in the end, will prevail. If they can find their unity, if they can banish disunity for another day, 400 million Arabs between the Atlantic and the Gulf, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, with one language, believing in one God, my goodness, they should be a superpower. Unfortunately, they're not quite yet. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. This has been Have It Out with Galloway. I hope you'll join me on that screen and be part of a real living audience for future programs. Thank you very much for watching.